Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is my honor today to stand before the body and bring before this body today House Bill 221, which relates to school bus safety here in Kentucky. This bill deals with the safety issues of protecting, I think, the most vulnerable individuals in our state, and that is our children that ride the school buses to and from school. And hopefully this bill will provide added protection for their safety as they are exiting and entering onto these school buses. But, Mr. Speaker, at this time, I would ask the clerk to please call House Committee Substitute Number 1.
Clerk, please report.
House Committee Substitute 1 to House Bill 221.
Gentleman from Menifee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If there are any questions on House Committee Substitute 1, I would be glad to answer them. But if not, I would move for adoption of the House Committee Substitute.
Motion is for the adoption of the House Committee Substitute 1. Is there any discussion on the committee sub? Seeing none, those in favor signify by voting aye. Those opposed, nay. House Committee Substitute 1 is adopted. Gentleman from Menifee.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, what House Bill 221, as we just adopted the committee substitute, does is it allows school districts here in the state of Kentucky, if they so choose, to mount cameras on their school bus arms that would record and detect any illegal passing that would occur when that school bus was in a stopped position, either loading children or unloading passengers from that bus. And one of the most important things that I would like to point out to the members today, if we are able to pass this piece of legislation, that school districts across Kentucky would not have to pay one single dollar to have these cameras mounted. This would be of no cost to the school districts, and it also is not mandatory. If a school district so chose to do this, they could do that. If they so chose not to have those cameras mounted, that would be each district's option. If we were able, or if we are allowed to do this through the passage of this bill, we would actually become the 23rd state in the country that would have legislation that would permit their school buses to have cameras mounted that would catch illegal activity that would, as far as passing a stopped school bus. So I think that it's a very important piece of legislation that protects individuals. So how does this work? Once the school district would come to a contractual agreement with a vendor, whomever that would be, they would at that point then allow those cameras to be attached to their school bus arms. And once the bus was stopped and the arm would be engaged, then that recording would start. And the recordings that would be, of course, the recordings that would find an illegal act that would happen there, then those recordings that would then be fed to a central location. And if it was determined that this was an illegal passing of a bus, then that information would be shared by the company that they had moved into an agreement with back to the local law enforcement agencies. And then the law enforcement agencies would have 31 days from the time that the infraction was reported to the local officials to issue a citation. If there was not a citation issued within 31 days, then you would not be allowed to file or to issue a citation after that point. So I want to make that very clear, and I want to be just really blunt right here, Mr. Speaker. And I think all of us in here would say, really, we have no sympathy, or I have no sympathy for anybody that passes a school bus that's setting to unload or load children onto that bus. And I think the question that has been brought up by some individuals We passed this same bill last year here in the state. This is the third year we brought this before the House. This is the second year I've carried it. We passed it here last year, 94-3 on this floor. And the question that has been brought up by some individuals that there's some privacy issues there, and we're attempting to find things that people are doing illegally. Well, folks, it doesn't matter where we go. There's cameras recording everything anymore. Cameras are recording basically every move we make. And I think that this is very, very important if we could stop this from happening, which happens apparently far more than any of us think. I was able to find a few records, actually only 2 years back, wasn't able to get any information. But I found out 2 years ago there was only 137 violations that were issued in this entire state. And those were just happened to be a police officer or a sheriff or someone was in the vicinity and saw that violation occur. But, Mr. Speaker, at this time, I would like to yield to the lady from Shelby for a friendly floor amendment, and I think this would clear up some of the issues of some of the privacy issues. So,
Chair recognizes the lady from Shelby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I ask the clerk to report Floor Amendment 1 to House Committee Sub of House Bill 221.
Clerk, please report.
House Floor Amendment 1 to House Bill 221.
Lady from Shelby.
Mr. Speaker, this floor amendment is offered to strengthen House Bill 221 by addressing the concerns of privacy and by protecting the legitimate privacy concerns of the citizens of the Commonwealth in light of this bill's authorization of bus arm cameras, an authorization that is a legitimate exercise of the police power of the Commonwealth and the power to address the educational issues and issues of welfare and health in the state. This bill does this by deleting lines 7 through 10 on page 2 of the bill and inserting the language of the floor amendment. Mr. Speaker, at this time I ask for passage, if there are no questions, of Floor Amendment 1 to House Committee Sub of House Bill 221.
Motion is for the adoption of House Floor Amendment 1. Is there any discussion on the floor amendment? Seeing none, those in favor signify by voting aye. Those opposed, nay. House Floor Amendment 1 is adopted. Gentleman from Menifee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In wrapping up this afternoon, the only other thing I'd like to add is if a violation occurs and there is an issuance up to someone that does commit a violation, the local legislative body of that county would determine the fine, which would not exceed $300 for the first offense and would not exceed $500 for the second offense, and a violation would not result in any points being assessed to that individual's driver's license. But also failure to pay the fine within 60 days, though, would result in suspension of the registration of that vehicle. And for what it's worth, Mr. Speaker, in the other 22 states, statistics have shown us that 95% of the violations that when it's issued, 95% pay the fine without any appeal at all. So lastly, the only thing that the committee sub addressed from last year's bill was that the local sheriff would be compensated $25 for each citation that they had to handle and they had to give out in their local jurisdiction. And the Kentucky Sheriff's Association was fine with that. And so, Mr. Speaker, if there are any questions, I would be glad to answer them. But if there aren't, I would move for passage today of House Bill 221 as was amended by House Committee Substitute 1 and also House Floor Amendment 1.